Hey, what's up, fellas? How you doing, man? Antonelli here.
Hey, what's going on, guys? How we doing? Matt Antonelli here. So I threw a video up yesterday talking about the negotiations that are going on currently between the owners and the Players Association in Major League Baseball to try to get a season going here shortly, hopefully in the next month or so. And there's an article that came up last night on ESPN. Jeff Passan has been covering a lot of this. And his article is Why Financial Battle Over 2020 MLB Season is About to Get Really, Really Ugly. So we talked in the last video, in yesterday's video, one of the sticking points that I think is going to be difficult to overcome is the 50-50 revenue split. And so this article kind of goes into that. And so I want to go into it here. We're going to look through it because Passan brings up a lot of interesting points. You know, yesterday in the comment section of my video, I know a lot of people get really upset when baseball players, owners, anyone around the game talks about money. There's a lot of comments saying, you know, baseball players are overpaid. They should never get this much anyway. They should just come back and play. You know, the money should be going to teachers and nurses. And so I totally understand why some people would say that and think that. I get it. Baseball is a game, right? It's just a game that we all played when we were younger, and we played for free. And most people that play baseball don't get paid anything. But as I said in the comment section, baseball is a billion-dollar industry. Whether people agree that it should be or not, it is a billion-dollar industry. There's a lot of money in the game. The owners are making an awful lot of money. And the game of baseball revolves around the players. If there was no players, there'd be no games. There'd be no fans. There'd be nothing, right? And so if it's a billion-dollar industry, the players need to be compensated with a lot of money. That's just the way it works. Now, let's get into this exact article because it's going to shed some light and maybe answer some questions on why the players wouldn't agree to a 50-50 revenue split, even though it's still a lot of money for players. Okay, so let's get into the article. He starts off by saying, because the first item, the 50-50 revenue split, is a non-starter for players. Before explaining, it's essential to understand how revenue works in baseball. The NFL, NBA, and NHL all have revenue splits. They also operate in salary cap systems. Straight revenue splits, in which sport-related income is pooled and distributed according to formulas agreed upon in collective bargaining negotiations, historically have been the domain of cap systems. MLB operates with no salary cap. In baseball, there are two streams of revenue, local and national. Local revenue includes television contracts, which range from around $20 million a year for the Florida Marlins to upwards of $250 million a year for the Los Angeles Dodgers, and in-game proceeds. MLB estimates that 40% of revenue comes from tickets, concessions, and other gate-related income. Nearly half of local net revenue is pooled and shared. National revenue comes from television contracts for the postseason and games of the week, league-owned media entities, licensing, merchandising, and corporate sponsorships. All national revenue is shared equally. The pandemic has turned off the revenue spigot. Whether local revenue accounts for 40% of teams' incoming cash or a cut in the 30s, as past reports have suggested, the prospect of going a full season without fans and potentially going fan-free or at least fan-light into the 2021 season is daunting for teams' bottom lines. Because all 30 teams' revenue streams differ, it is realistic to believe some teams will lose money playing games without fans this season. Already, multiple teams are planning layoffs or furloughs starting June 1st. Owners are looking to cut costs wherever they can, and nothing costs more than player salaries. So while the league and union in March agreed to pay players on a prorated basis, at 82 games they would receive 50.6% of their expected 2020 salaries, the owners believe that language in that agreement allows them to renegotiate player wages in the event of games with no fans in the stands. The players vehemently disagree. Okay, so now he goes into how bad for the players would a split actually be. He talks about some back-of-the-napkin math. Then he says, Forbes estimated that MLB's industry-wide revenues in 2019 were $10.7 billion. Club sources have suggested the number was lower, but in that ballpark. Let's use the higher number, but use teams' estimate that 40% of local revenues will vanish without ticket sales. That leaves $6.4 billion. Sources have estimated that local television revenue is somewhere in the $2.2 billion to $2.5 billion range annually. Because teams under this plan would play only half the games, that's half the revenue, say another $1.2 billion haircut. And that does not account for regional sports networks, which pay local TV rights fees, potentially asking for a discount based on the difference in the product, whether it's because there are no fans in the stands or because teams are forced to play away from home thanks to local government regulations. Ignoring that possibility, we're down to $5.2 billion. National TV money is estimated at $1.7 billion a year. The point of implementing expanded playoffs would be to maintain that number, with the loss of half the Sunday Night Baseball games and expected cancellation of the All-Star Game and Home Run Derby in LA. In the current system, MLB guaranteed number of playoff games is 26 and its maximum of 43. Expanded playoffs would swell those numbers to 36 and 59. That translates to hundreds of millions of extra dollars in postseason revenue, keeping the overall revenue number in the low $5 billion range. Losses in other areas are almost a given, dropping revenue under $5 billion, which admittedly still seems high, especially if owners are claiming they could lose money this year. Still, it makes the prospect of a 50-50 split with players interesting financially. Player salaries for 2020 are estimated somewhere between $4.2 billion and $4.4 billion. Let's go with 4.3. At a prorated salary for 50.6% of the game, that's around $2.8 billion. Half of, say, $4.8 billion would be $2.4 billion. Could players really be guaranteed more money in a 50-50 split? It's possible, sources say, but looking at it strictly from a revenue perspective ignores three issues critical to the union. 1. Anything with even the slightest relation to a salary cap system frightens players, even if this proposal doesn't involve a salary ceiling or any other cap tenets. The mistrust between the sides has deepened in recent years. Just look at their different interpretation of that March agreement, which is barely 6 weeks old. And the slightest whiff of cap sends off Pandora's box signals at the union. Number 2, salaries do not grow commensurate with revenue gains. So now, in a year in which the game is struggling, it's necessary for the players to share in the losses. That's not how it works. Number 3, if a second wave of the coronavirus were to strike before or during the postseason and force the cancellation of games, postseason TV money would vanish. Even if the estimated revenues were $5 billion, they would crater with the cancellation of playoff money and leave the players with less than their prorated share. To really understand what the players think about the revenue split idea, one needed only to hear what MLB PA Executive Director Tony Clark told The Athletic. A system that restricts player pay based on revenues is a salary cap. Period. This is not the first salary cap proposal our union has received. It probably won't be the last. That the league is trying to take advantage of a global health crisis to get what they failed to achieve in the past and to anonymously negotiate through the media for the last several days suggests they know exactly how this will be received. None of this is beneficial to the process of finding a way for us to safely get back on the field and resume the 2020 season, which continues to be our sole focus. So this whole idea of a salary cap, even though it's not a salary cap, if it smells at all like salary cap to the union and to the players, they're not going to agree with it. One of the reasons why baseball players have been able to get paid so much money is because they've been really, really tough negotiators over the years, and they've really fought for what they've gotten, right? Past players, the things that past players have had to go through and do to be able to get the current players the amount of money, the contracts, the no salary cap, all that stuff that they now receive. And so the players and the union are not going to all of a sudden be less tough with their negotiations, even though the season could possibly be canceled, even though we're going through a pandemic, even though fans really want baseball. And I'm a huge baseball fan. I really want baseball too. But I would say the union is not going to change their stance or their thoughts on possible salary cap. Again, it's not a salary cap, but what they view as a salary cap. They're not going to change their view or stance on that and negotiate any harder than they have in the past just because of what's going on in the world, unfortunately. Okay, so now he talks about what's the worst case scenario here, and he says, no season at all. What? That doesn't sound right to you? Turn back the clocks 26 years to 1994 when MLB wanted to institute a salary cap. The union refused it, and in August it went on strike. Baseball lost the World Series because the league sought a salary cap and the players refused to budge. Since then, baseball has seen 25 years of labor peace, the most since the union was founded in 1966. Now here's some more. He says, they could, in fact, for argument's sake, let's assume they do. What are the outcomes for each side? Players. They don't get paid beyond the lump sum of $170 million negotiated in the March deal, a problematic issue for the surprising number of players who live paycheck to paycheck. They lose a year of playing, an item of immense value for those who understand baseball as a profession with a short career span. The free agent market after the 2020 season would crash. The MLBPA may dip into savings reserve for an emergency, such as a potential work stoppage, after the current collective bargaining agreement expires after the 2021 season. Agents on whom players lean for counsel don't receive commissions, and some accordingly are threatened with insolvency. Now, for the owners, their revenues shrivel to almost nothing. Mass firings and furloughs take place. Multiple bankruptcies are possible, if not likely, either prompting bailouts from MLB or forcing owners to sell. Franchise values, which have skyrocketed in recent years, plummet because recovery from the financial hole created by the lost 2020 season could take years. Then he says, whose outcome is worse? They are both absolutely terrible. On one hand, the finite nature of players' careers weighs very heavily. Owners tend to be in the game long term, and the recovery of the economy could eventually make up for the enormous losses. On the other, firing, furloughs, bankruptcies, and plummeting values are like the four horsemen of the financial apocalypse. There is a principle of negotiation called BATNA. Best alternative to a negotiated agreement. When one side's BATNA is better than the other's, the side gains a significant advantage. If there is an advantage here, it's not very big. Both sides' alternatives feel positively ruinous. And that's not even taking into account the missed opportunity cost of being the only team sport back during a time when fans are craving something to watch, as well as the narrative that would lay waste to the sport's reputation and haunt it if money did in fact scuttle a season. Major League Baseball, the sport that shut down during a global pandemic because it couldn't figure out how to split up billions of dollars. Okay, so the last one we're going to look at here are why are players so entrenched? For one, union lawyers believe they're in the right legally when it comes to guaranteeing players' prorated salary. The March agreement contains a player compensation and benefits section that does not specifically address a reduction in salary if games are played in front of no fans. That said, on page 1 of the agreement, the first point of the resumption of play section includes the words, "The 2020 championship season shall not be commenced unless and until each of the following conditions is satisfied." One of those conditions ends with, "The Office of the Commissioner and Players Association will discuss in good faith the economic feasibility of playing games in the absence of spectators or at appropriate substitute neutral sites." The first sentence of the compensation section begins with the clause, "If and when the conditions exist for the commencement of the 2020 championship season," language similar to that on the first page. When asked by ESPN to interpret the language, 4 longtime labor lawyers who work for neither MLB nor the union adopted different positions. 2 said the similarity in the language made it clear that those sections were meant to be tied together. 1 agreed with the union's interpretation that anything about compensation changing should have been written explicitly. The 4th called any potential grievance on a matter a toss-up. Beyond the legal question, there is no matter of how it has been presented to players. Union leadership has been vociferous in saying players would be paid their full prorated salaries. Part of this could be strategic, as a rallying point that a group of 1,200 players of different ages, races, and homelands with differences in opinion will not be exploited by 30 billionaires. The tack does come with hazards. Promising something like full prorated salaries takes away a potential negotiating chip. If Clark cedes any money to ownership, he runs the risk of looking weak to players. Thus, he is incentivized not to give up money, even though it's clear that money is an imperative part of any deal. And lastly, do the players have an argument for their full salaries that goes beyond the legal interpretation of the March agreement? Absolutely, they're the ones who actually have to go out and work during a pandemic, which is not to compare them to those who toil in hospitals or nursing homes or grocery stores, but it is to compare them to owners who most certainly do not have to travel on planes, stay in hotels, or simply leave their homes. Okay, how long do they have? 4 sources landed on the same time frame, about 2.5 weeks, with a chance for a resolution, good or bad, sooner but not much later. In 15 days or so, May will be winding down, and figuring out the logistics of getting twice the normal-sized team's worth of players to one location takes time. Players want 3 weeks to get ready, and if baseball is to begin on the 4th of July, then training needs to start June 10th. That's squeezing a lot of stuff into not a lot of time. And does Passan think that a deal gets done? He says, I go back to the BATNA, and I think yes. I go back to strike, and I think that BATNA doesn't mean anything. The hope is that MLB learned its lesson from 1994. The truth is that we won't know until a deal is struck or it all falls apart. So here's a little advice. Don't get too hung up on this week. It's easy to be a prisoner of the moment, to get high when it looks like baseball's coming back, to get low when the conversation turns to money. This is the beginning, and the beginning can be complicated and tumultuous and not particularly reflective of the actual state of play. That's coming soon enough, and when it does, it will say as much about the future of baseball as it does the present. Man, that was a lot of stuff right there. So I don't know if that clears up anything for you guys or not. Hopefully it does give a little bit of insight. I know that I learned some things that I did not know before reading this article. So I know there's a lot of things that have to go right besides the revenue split. I do still think that's going to be a big hang-up. But what do you guys think? Do you think that the owners and the players are going to be able to come to an agreement on this revenue split? Do you think either side gives in? Speaking of the strike in 94, I don't think baseball wants to go back 25 years of labor peace since that time. I hope that they do everything they can to figure this out, and maybe both sides have to yield a little bit, but hopefully we can figure something out from a monetary perspective that allows baseball to get back on the field. So let me know what you think in the comment section below. Subscribe to the channel, share the video with all your friends, all that good stuff, and we'll talk to you later.